Friends, we have read about the provisions for timeline of issue of invoice. But why we have read that? Because when we read the time of supply provision, it always has some linkage with the timeline for issue of invoice. We will see about that when we start covering all the time of supply provisions. But as I mentioned, the time of supply provisions has been covered under section 12 and section 13. 12 for time of supply of goods and 13 for time of supply of services. And 14 is basically whenever there is a change in rate of tax, for section 14 comes in place. Now, since we have to read section 12 and section 13 first, and I mentioned that the build-up of both these sections are same. Why I am saying so? Because both these sections have 6 subsections. So, section 12 has 6 subsections, section 12 subsection 1 to section 12 subsection 6. Similarly, section 13 also has 6 subsections, section 13.1 to section 13.6. Now, when I am saying build-up of both these sections are same, that means in both these sections, subsection 1 tells us nothing. Say for example, section 12 subsection 1 says the time of supply for goods will be determined in accordance with the provision of section 12. Similarly, section 13 subsection 1 says time of supply of services will be determined in accordance with section 13. So, they do not tell us what exactly is time of supply. Both the sections subsection 1 only tells us that it covers the time of supply provision for goods and services. That is it. Now, subsection 2 of both the sections covers forward charge, which means section 12 subsection 2 covers determination of time of supply of goods in case of forward charge. Section 13 subsection 2 covers determination of time of supply of services in case of forward charge. We have already briefly covered what does the term forward charge means. So, forward charge means whenever we are paying tax under normal scenario. What does normal scenario means? Supplier is supplying goods or services to recipient. He is charging tax from the recipient along with the consideration and paying the tax to the government, which means supplier is paying the tax to the government. This is called forward charge. So, both the sections subsection 2, that is section 12 subsection 2 and section 13 subsection 2 deals with forward charge. Now, both the section subsection 3 covers reverse charge scenario, which means section 12 subsection 3 says determination of time of supply of goods in case of reverse charge, and section 13 subsection 3 says determination of time of supply of services in case of forward charge. Now, we have already briefly touched upon what does the term reverse charge means. Reverse charge means where the recipient is liable to pay tax to the government. Under forward charge, what used to happen? The supplier used to collect tax and then he used to deposit. But under reverse charge, recipient will directly pay tax to the government. He will only pay consideration to the supplier. Clear? Now, so what we have done, we have discussed subsection 1, 2 and 3 of both these sections, that is section 12 and 13. Now, subsection 4 of both these sections deals with supply of vouchers. That means how to determine the time of supply whenever we are issuing voucher. So, 12 basically says time of supply of voucher for goods and 13 says for services. Clear? Now, we have discussed subsection 1, 2, 3 and 4. What does subsection 5 says? Subsection 5 of both these sections talk about any other case, which means if we are trying to find out time of supply for any other case which is not covered elsewhere, subsection 5 will come into picture. Clear? Section 12 will be referred for goods and 13 will be referred for services. Lastly, subsection 6 of both these sections talks about a situation whenever there is an addition in the value of goods due to late fee, penalty, anything like that. Which means if suppose I have supplied certain goods to Mr. A, okay, and after some time based on our agreement, we determined that Mr. A is also liable to pay me certain interest or penalty. In that case, how we will determine the time of supply for such penalty? Clear? So, subsection 6 of both these sections deals with the penalty case. So, we have covered broadly how the build-up of both these sections are there. So, subsection 1 of both these sections talks about the general thing that section 12 is for goods and 13 is for services. Subsection 2 talks about forward charge. Subsection 3 talks about reverse charge. Subsection 4 talks about vouchers. Subsection 5 talks about any other case, and subsection 6 talks about addition in the value of goods or services whenever there is any late fee, interest or penalty. Clear? Now what we are going to do is we are going to pick up each of these topics like forward charge, reverse charge, etc., and we'll try to determine the time of supply in accordance with both the provisions. Friends, now we are going to discuss about time of supply in case of forward charge, and we are going to break our discussion into two parts. As I mentioned, forward charge is covered into two sections. Section 12 subsection 2, which determines the time of supply in case of forward charge of goods, and section 13 subsection 2, which determines time of supply of services in case of forward charge. Let us first start with time of supply of goods in case of forward charge. Okay. What does section 12 subsection 2 says? When the section 12 subsection 2 was first introduced, that means when on 1st July 2017, when the law first came, it says that time of supply in case of forward charge for goods will be earlier of the three events. What are the three events? The date of issue of invoice, the last date of issue of invoice under section 31, and the date of receipt of payment. Friends, there are three events which was mentioned, and the earlier of the three events will be regarded as time of supply of goods in case of forward charge. This was when the law was first introduced. Okay. So the major challenge in this was even the advance payment, even if you are receiving some advance payment, you were liable to pay tax on that. Okay. Because what it says, the time of supply will be the earlier of the three events. That means the date of receipt of payment, the date of issue of invoice, or the last date on which the invoice was required to be issued under section 31. And what does section 31 says? For goods it says whenever you are removing the goods or before the time of removal of goods, you are required to issue the invoice. Where the supply does not involve movement, in that case when you are making the goods available to the recipient. That's what section 31 says. In short, section 31 says whenever you are removing the goods, before removal or at the time of removal, you are required to issue the invoice. So in this case, what used to happen that even if I am receiving some advance payment from my customer, I was liable to pay tax to the government. For example, suppose A Limited is into steel business, okay, and there is a company called XYZ Limited. XYZ Limited came to A Limited for the purpose of placing an order, and as per A Limited's usual practice, you have to give at least 10% as an advance. So as soon as XYZ Limited gave 10% as an advance, A Limited was liable to pay tax to the government, because even the advance was liable to tax, because what I mentioned earlier of the three events, date of receipt of payment, date of issue of invoice, or last date for issue of invoice. Since the invoice has not been issued till now because it's only an advance, so the second point is not valid. Third point, last date of issue of invoice is when the goods are getting removed. Till now the goods have not been removed, so last date of invoice is not coming. But I am receiving the payment, I am receiving an advance payment. So even advance payment will attract GST. And this caused a huge and cry among the business community, because till now you never used to happen that even advance was liable for indirect taxes. So there were a lot of representations which was made to the government that this is practically very difficult, because as usual practice we receive lot of advances, and it was getting really difficult for the business community to adhere to the provisions. So what government did? Initially government omitted this provision for people with lower turnover. So government specified a threshold limit. If your turnover is less than threshold limit, then on advance GST was not applicable. But subsequently what government did? Government extended this provision to everyone. That means none of the people will now have to adhere to the advance provision. So friends, what government did? Government issued a notification number 66/2017 central tax dated 15th of November 2017, on which government said that any taxpayer, all the taxpayer now will have to pay tax, or the time of supply will be determined in accordance with subclause A of section 13 subsection 2. Basically what it means, it says the time of supply for goods will be determined in accordance with earlier of the two events. What are the two events? The date of issue of invoice or the last date on which the invoice was required to be issued under section 31. So earlier there were three parts: date of issue of invoice, last date on which invoice was required to be issued, and receipt of payment. Government granted exemption from the third piece. It says now the time of supply will be earlier of the two events: the date of issue of invoice or the last date on which the invoice was required to be issued under section 31. Let's take an example to understand it. Suppose A Limited is a supplier and A Limited is supplying goods to, say, Mr. B. Okay, A Limited is supplying goods to Mr. B. A Limited has supplied, say, tables to Mr. B on 5th of October 2017, but A Limited has not issued the invoice. How will be the time of supply be determined? According to the provision of section 31, the last date of issue of invoice is what? When the goods are removed, before or at the time of removal. The goods was removed on 5th of October, correct? So in that case, what will happen? In that case, the time of supply will be 5th of October, even though the invoice has not been issued, because the provision says it will be earlier of the two events: the date of issue of invoice or the last date of issue of invoice. In this case, since invoice has not been issued, the last date of invoice will come into picture. That is 5th of October will be considered as a time of supply of goods in that case. So friends, we have discussed about the time of supply in case of goods under forward charge. What we mentioned, the time of supply will be the earlier of the two events. So what are the two events? The date of issue of invoice or the last date of issue of invoice under section 31. So this is about the time of supply of goods in case of forward charge. That means section 12 subsection 2. Now we will discuss about section 13 subsection 2. That means time of supply in case of services.